Let's face it, academic reading often feels more like an exercise in frustration, in fear, and in self-loathing, but it doesn't have to be that way. Hi, I'm Ruth, and I celebrate unconventional learners. Today we're going to look at 3 different techniques to help with supporting unconventional ways of doing reading, involve different ways of approaching reading. Number 1, make the book work for you. Number 2 is change up your reading. And number 3 is mark the book. So let's get started. Unlike all other reading, academic reading does not begin at page 1 and go on all the way till you come to the end and then stop. You need to shake up the way that you actually get at that information. You've got to make that text work for you. So one of the ways that you do this is to actually read the first paragraph of a chapter or an article and then read the last one. Now what you're doing here is priming your brain to pay attention to certain things when you come through to do another reading of the text, but also what it's doing is giving you the lie of the land, knowing where the author wants to go, where they're leading you in that process. From there you can go through and then do another read where you read the subheadings, or maybe you will go through and you'll choose to read other information as well, like the first line in each paragraph, because a paragraph will often explain what has been said in that first sentence. So the first sentence is the important one. Another way of making the book work for you is to think about the way it's actually formatted. When a publisher comes to format a book, it's all about cramming as much in as you can with as few pages as possible. So what can often happen is that the diagrams, tables and summaries wind up in the wrong place. So make sure that you go through first and use sticky notes or other ways of blocking off those images or tables if you find that they're at a distance from where they need to be. The other thing is that often what happens in the formatting is that sometimes in the middle of a sentence suddenly an image appears. Sometimes this even happens within a word itself, and this can be quite distracting, particularly for unconventional learners, because if your brain switches over into that new space rather than staying in that text space. So blocking those out to begin with and maybe putting down the details can help with that. In some textbooks they have a summary. So the first thing you should do before reading anything else is actually read the summary. So you start at the back before you go forward. So this process of making the book work for you is that first step, that first way of getting into the text that you have been given. The second step is really changing up how you read and thinking about the fact that when you're reading academically, you're not reading something as a single one-off. This is not something that you will just force into your brain. In fact, you want to change how you even think about reading when you're coming to academic work. So for your first go through the entire text, it's great to listen and do. There's different ways of doing, and lots of students use different ways of doing, including doing the housework whilst they're listening to the first read through of the literature. They might choose to go for a walk, maybe it's something they'll listen to on the bus. But that first read is just something to gain an overview of what is happening. This is not a place where you start analysing and thinking and judging what's going on, but you're just wanting to find out what the information is. The big thing here when you're thinking about starting with the first oral is finding a good voice to listen to. There are some great voices out there that are easy to listen to and some that are not so good. And the other thing to think about too is if you have Indigenous language in part of your discussions, then that oral is not going to do a good job of it. So you need to make sure that you go back later and listen to those particular words using a dictionary. If you're not so into oral and it's a bit frustrating for you and you find it annoying, another option is to use a colour. Now this is quite controversial. Some people are very pro changing the colour of a page, some people are very anti-colour changing the colour of the page. But this can make a difference in how you access and how quickly you can access that information. Another thing that can be really useful in this space is Beeline Reader. I don't know if you've come across it, but it changes the colour of the text. And this is designed because what happens is when you read a page, you read across the page and then you go back and you overshoot slightly before you come back to that sentence. So the idea of Beeliner is that it actually helps the eye to track the words more easily. And some people find that this actually helps to speed up their reading as well. Okay, so we've worked out how to change the book. We've now looked at that first overview of what the author is saying to us, and then the next stage is to actually mark the book. Well, maybe not every book, because librarians might not be particularly happy, but this is a place where you can actually engage with it. You don't want to leave the page pristine, and you don't simply want to leave the page highlighted. Highlighters can be great, but they can also be overwhelming as you wind up with too many things highlighted because you're not sure what to do. Now that's why we had that first stage of listening, because it helps when we come through to this final reading of analysis that we have got something to think with. In marking the book, there's a lot of different techniques. One of the most basic ones is called Morse code. It's basically just a dot and a dash. So the dot is for the main point that the author is making, and a dash is supporting material or examples. And that's just something you go through and mark down. You can use that also if you're listening, if you want to start taking notes. I actually add two things to this Morse code phase for people who are neurodiverse. First off, an A in a circle whenever you come across an author. Now the reason for doing this is because then you've got how the author is quoting this person in their main work. Otherwise you just wind up with a list of names at the end and no context to them. So this gives you a way to go back and say, well, what were they using and why were they using that particular writer that way? It then gives you a clear idea as to whether or not that may be something you need to use and follow through on and find the original source for. The other thing that I recommend doing is adding a W. Now, the W is for word. Often as we're reading, we can come across words that we don't understand. And the temptation is to actually stop reading, go and check on our phones to see what that word means, and then come back. What happens in that moment is you wind up taking yourself out of what that author is saying, and it takes a bit of time to get back. So it's often better to just put a W by the word you're not sure about and keep reading, and then come back and check that word later on. Keep the context and keep yourself focused on that particular reading. Other techniques include the line technique. So you can have straight lines, squiggly lines, circles and squares. Usually what people do with this is they will prioritize. Basic information is a straight line. The squiggly line shows that there's more information, it's a more important idea. Circles, again, increases the level of importance, and then a square, which is the most important thing. What I would recommend here in this unconventional space is actually switching those things up. Make them work in a way that's good for you. So for example, if a particular word captures your imagination and it doesn't necessarily relate to the material, it doesn't matter. Just put a circle around that word, because there might be something there that's going to be of use later on. So it might be a word that you read that triggers some ideas for an assignment. So it's about learning to trust the ways in which you're interacting with the text. Some literature is incredibly dense and there's a lot of information in it that we need to try and manage. A way of doing that is to do a paragraph summary. So what you do here is you just create a bracket around the paragraph, and then you can either do a doodle summary of what that paragraph says, or maybe just put down 2 or 3 words about what that paragraph says. What that then creates is all down the side of your book or your article is a summary of what you're going to find in those places. So this helps you with going back to that information. But what I recommend is not leaving it there at a summary. I would suggest that at the bottom of the page, you ask yourself a question: what was important here? And then on the other side of the page, just do a quick doodle of what you think was important about what was happening on this page. This is going to help you with moving into that next stage of integrating the knowledge, not just seeing the knowledge as this distant thing away from you. In changing how you read, one of the great things to do is actually to diversify your knowledge from outside the text. So if there are particular concepts that you're discovering as you go along that are important, go and find other sources to support them. We have phenomenal media sources out there now. There are all sorts of different documentaries and podcasts that you could draw on to help to reinforce the knowledge that you're gaining from your text. In fact, even people have found that particular types of gaming can trigger memories of their textbook, or they can take information from their textbooks into that space. So it becomes something that's integrated, not just something that's an abstract from them. Another way to take notes is to not simply mark the book. As I said, sometimes with libraries you can't, but to actually create a digital source as well. Programs like OneNote and Evernote can be ways to record your information as you go. So for example, if you did the paragraph summary, you could write a paragraph summary into OneNote or Evernote. Another way of doing this is to draw those summaries, photograph them, and then get them transferred across into those particular programs. So there's a lot of different opportunities here in how you mark and engage with that material. You want to make it more active. Otherwise what can happen is we slip into that zombification mode where the information is just there and we get to the end of the page and think, what on earth did I read? You want to make it active. Another part of making it active is actually to not do more than 20 minutes of reading at a time. If you do more than 20 minutes, what happens is you just create a traffic jam for yourself. So after 20 minutes, take a chance for a walk, go and grab yourself a drink. Just give yourself some time to decompress and just take on the information that you've been reading and you've been marking up in your book. And because you've been marking up, when you go back to reading again, you can have a quick look at what you've done in those summaries, and then you'll be able to get back into the book quite quickly. So I hope you do make your books start to do some work for you, that you change the way in which you do reading and shake it up a bit. And that finally that you do mark your books and start to engage with the material that is in them. Finally, and most importantly, I think of all of this, is to recognise and honour your path. You're looking through this work to gain information, to integrate it into your ways of being, and to integrate it into your knowledge for the rest of your lives. So celebrate that part and that achievement. Even in those moments where it just doesn't seem to be connecting properly, celebrate you. So if you found this video useful, please click the like, and if you'd like to get more videos like it, click subscribe. And if you have any comments or questions, please chuck them down below in the comments section.